If you've never sat through the reading of a will, let me tell you, it can make the most familiar place feel like foreign ground. The air inside Wilson and Associates was heavy that morning, even as sunlight tried its best to cheer up the old mahogany panels and dust-speckled windows. I remember tracing circles on my coffee cup, the bitter scent doing little to warm my hands. Maybe it was the knowledge that this was really the end of something, or maybe it was the way my brother Matt filled the space, back straight, shoes polished, suit so crisp it looked starched by pride alone. Matt had always taken up more room than I thought possible. He greeted Mr. Wilson, our family attorney, like an old friend, firm handshake, a too loud laugh, the kind that bounced off the walls and made the secretaries peek in. Me? I hovered near the window, pretending to admire the city skyline. But my mind was back with my mother, remembering how, in her final days, she'd whispered about finding beauty in unexpected places. At the time, I thought she was delirious from the pain medication. Now, I wondered if there was more. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat and the ritual began. The formal language of the law always sounds colder when it's your life being divided. To our son, Matthew Bennett, for his steadfast dedication to the Bennett family legacy, we bequeath, and the list unrolled, the Vermont house, the Hamptons cottage, controlling shares in Bennett Technologies, enough assets to keep Matt in Italian shoes for the rest of his natural life. With every item, Matt's grin grew. I could almost hear the mental tally he was keeping. When it came to my turn, Mr. Wilson hesitated. To our daughter, Rachel Bennett, we leave the painting, Autumn Twilight, currently hanging in the study of our main residence. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press on your eardrums. Matt let out a snort, he didn't even try to hide it, and I felt my cheeks flush, the old shame creeping up. Just a painting. Not even a mention of the trust fund or a share in the company my parents had built from nothing. Just oil on canvas. I stared down at my hands, knuckles white. I heard Mr. Wilson add, as if it might soften the blow, your mother was very fond of that piece. Matt leaned back, his voice syrupy. Well, at least you got Mom's favorite. Maybe you'll finally learn to appreciate the finer things, Ratch. He never did bother to call me by my name, always a nickname, always a dig. I tried to steady my breathing, refusing to let tears prick my eyes in front of him. While Mr. Wilson wrapped up the legalities, reminding me the painting needed to be collected within a week, I drifted off for a moment, lost in memory. I saw my mother as she'd been on a rare quiet afternoon, sunlight falling across her profile as she traced invisible lines along the frame of Autumn Twilight. She never said what she saw in that painting, only that it was a comfort. At the time, I didn't ask. I wish now that I had. When the formalities ended, Matt stood and straightened his tie, already talking about meetings, investments, renovations. He clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to sting. Let's not drag this out, Rachel. If you want help hanging your new artwork, let me know. I can send someone from the maintenance staff. His tone made it clear what he thought of my inheritance. Outside the office, the autumn air bit at my cheeks, sharper than I expected. I walked for blocks, unsure if I was headed home or just away from the weight of that room. The city bustled on, horns, footsteps, snippets of overheard conversations. I felt invisible, a shadow moving among people with places to be. I found myself pausing at a bakery my mother once loved. I bought a small coffee and a poppy seed muffin, sitting by the window as the world spun past. The cup warmed my hands, but not the hollow in my chest. I kept seeing my mother's hand on that frame, her eyes lost in something I'd never been able to find. Maybe it was just grief making me look for meaning where there was none. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd meant for me to notice after all. By the time I headed home, the sun was dipping low, tossing gold across the Charles River. The city looked softer, blurred at the edges. I cradled the key Mr. Wilson had given me for the Vermont house in my pocket, its cold edge grounding. I would have to drive out soon, collect the painting, close up the place for good. Somehow, the idea of that final visit felt heavier than all the legal language in the world. As I turned the corner to my apartment, I caught sight of my own reflection in a storefront window, a woman on the verge of something, though I couldn't say what. The world around me moved forward, relentless, but for the first time in days, I wondered if there might be something left for me to find. Something my mother wanted me to see. Maybe the real inheritance wasn't the painting itself, but the mystery she left behind. I slipped inside, locked the door, and let the evening settle. Somewhere, deep down, a seed of curiosity took root. I couldn't say why, but as I readied for bed, I found myself thinking of my mother's voice again. Rachel, sometimes beauty is hidden where you least expect it. The words lingered in the quiet, softer than a prayer, stronger than regret. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, the only thing I was sure of was this: the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive up to Vermont felt longer than usual, the old back roads stretching through a tapestry of burned orange maples and brittle cornfields. I'd always loved this route in autumn, something about the golden hush and the sharp, smoky air felt like stepping into a memory. But that morning, every mile was weighted with the knowledge that I was coming home only to say goodbye. The Bennett house sat at the top of a winding gravel drive, white paint peeling, the porch sagging just a little more than I remembered. The windows watched me like old eyes, patient, knowing. I took a moment, hand on the steering wheel, to breathe in the hush. Some secrets hang on walls for years, Margaret used to say when I was a child, usually while dusting some forgotten painting or artifact in the halls. I smiled at the thought, but it faded quickly as I realized today, it was my job to lift one of those secrets from its place. Margaret met me at the door, her gray hair pulled back and her apron still crisp despite the dust of the old house. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, the years fell away. I was a little girl again, hiding in the kitchen to steal bites of ginger cookies. "Oh, Miss Rachel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your mother would be so proud you came yourself." There was something else in her eyes, too, an apology, or maybe worry. We made our way to the study together. It always smelled of pipe smoke and lemon oil, the place where my father would shut himself away for phone calls and tax returns, but it was my mother's presence I felt as soon as we entered. The painting, Autumn Twilight, hung just above the mantel, a burst of dusky purples and muted golds caught between the last light of day and the coming dark. I remembered watching Mom stand before it, tracing the frame with her fingertips as if searching for a pulse. Margaret and I worked in silence to take it down. The canvas was heavier than I'd guessed, my hands almost trembled with the effort, or maybe with something else, a kind of quiet dread. As we wrapped it carefully in a faded quilt, Margaret dabbed her eyes with her apron. "She loved this piece, you know," she murmured. "Spent hours just staring at it near the end. Sometimes talking to herself about numbers and patterns. We thought it was just the illness." I tucked that thought away, letting it settle beside all the other small mysteries my mother had left me. We walked through the house one last time, Margaret pointing out the crack in the parlor ceiling, the stubborn kitchen drawer, the spot on the stair where the boards still groaned in protest. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the study, now strangely bare. "I'll take good care of it," I promised, unsure if I meant the painting or the memory. Margaret squeezed my hand. "She trusted you, Rachel. Even when others didn't." The drive back to Boston was quiet, the painting buckled in beside me like a silent passenger. Each bump in the road felt amplified, as if I were carrying not just a canvas but the weight of a question left unanswered. Matt called once, but I let it go to voicemail. His messages always seemed to twist something inside me. By the time the city skyline appeared on the horizon, dusk had settled in, painting the world the same colors as Mom's favorite piece. My apartment was small but warm, the sort of place that collects sunlight in the afternoons and echoes with old floorboards at night. I cleared a spot on the living room wall, just above the radiator, and carefully hung Autumn Twilight. It felt almost ceremonial, like I was planting a flag in the middle of my grief, daring it to move around me. That first night, I sat on the sofa with a glass of Merlot, one of the few rituals I'd kept since Mom passed. She used to say that sharing a glass in the evening was how you teach your heart to settle. I held the rim to my lips, studying the painting in the soft lamplight. The forest scene was deeper than I remembered, shadows folding over each other, branches arching in patterns that almost looked purposeful. I found myself leaning forward, squinting to catch details I'd missed before, a flicker of blue amid the gold, a cluster of sharp, almost geometric shapes hidden in the undergrowth. Was it my imagination, or did some lines repeat, curling and zigzagging in strange constellations? I set down my glass and pressed my fingers lightly against the canvas, feeling for seams or hidden textures. A memory drifted in, Mom standing before this very painting, tracing lines, murmuring about finding order in the chaos. She'd always loved puzzles, and even as a child I'd catch her filling crosswords or rearranging tiles in a game only she seemed to understand. I smiled, thinking of her voice, "Rachel, art is more than color and canvas. Sometimes it's a message, waiting for the right eyes to see it." As the hours slipped by, the city outside fell quiet. I was still in my work clothes, feet tucked beneath me, eyes locked on the painting. My phone buzzed, a text from Matt, "Enjoy your masterpiece, sis. Hope it's worth more than it looks," winky face. I didn't reply. The usual sting of his words slid off me. I was too far away, too wrapped in the swirl of brushstrokes and secrets. At some point, I realized I hadn't even turned on the TV or checked my emails. I was alone, truly alone, but it wasn't the loneliness I'd feared. It felt like sitting in the presence of something unfinished, like waiting for a guest to arrive who'd left you a riddle on the doorstep. The clock ticked quietly. I let my thoughts wander, the wine warming my chest. Finally, I stood and brushed my fingers over the frame, tracing where my mother's hands had once lingered. The urge to solve whatever mystery lingered beneath the paint had become a hum in my blood, quiet but insistent. I promised myself I would look closer tomorrow, perhaps in better light. For now, I sat back down, glass in hand, and let my eyes drift over the shadowed woods, the hidden shapes, the sense that this painting held more than beauty. It held a question. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that settles over Boston after midnight, a city humming with distant traffic and the soft tick of radiators in old apartments like mine. I'd thought the painting would let me sleep, but instead, it seemed to glow in the low lamplight, demanding my attention. The numbers first appeared when the city lights flickered through my blinds, stretching patterns across my walls, gilding the edge of autumn twilight in a strange, spectral haze. It was then that I truly began to see what others missed. My mother's voice echoed in my head, her steady, patient tone, "Rachel, you have an eye for the unusual. Sometimes, the answer isn't in what's there, but what's hiding in plain sight." I let those words lead me, curiosity swelling into something almost feverish. The world outside faded until it was just me, the painting, and the soft glow of a single bulb. I started with the obvious, tilting the frame, angling it towards the streetlights, watching how dusk and gold played in the trees. But soon, I was digging through drawers for a flashlight, shining it from odd corners, searching for something my mother might have hidden. I pulled out an old magnifying glass from a box of college things. The lens wobbled, but it did the job. Up close, the forest seemed to rearrange itself, branches doubling back, patches of darkness repeating like a code. At times, I wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind, but every time I looked away, the urge to try again was stronger. When my eyes grew tired, I turned to the internet, typing James Morrison artist into the search bar. There was next to nothing, no gallery shows, no auction records, not even a halfway decent biography. The only clue was an archived mention of a small gallery in western Massachusetts, closed for years now. The lack of information made the painting feel even more mysterious, as if it had slipped between the cracks of the world, waiting for someone persistent enough to find its truth. I remembered evenings at the kitchen table, my mother and I poring over art books and restoration guides. She taught me to notice the tiniest details, a pigment that didn't quite match, a brushstroke that betrayed a secret mood. Most people just look at a painting, she'd say, but you, Rachel, you see the story hidden underneath. I smiled, warmed by the memory, letting it fortify me against the doubt gnawing at the edges of my mind. When I turned the lamp brighter, something shifted. The shadows on the painting sharpened, and within the undergrowth, certain shapes began to stand out. They weren't random, there was a symmetry, a sequence. Some formed gentle arcs, others sharp corners, and all seemed just a shade off from the rest, as if the artist had painted over them with deliberate care. I leaned in, heart thumping, and traced them lightly with my finger. Numbers. Not just hints, but clear as day, 5, 2, 7, 1, 4, and more, clustered like constellations. The sense of discovery was so strong I almost laughed out loud. My phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. Matt's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered, bracing myself for the inevitable condescension. His voice oozed self-satisfaction. "Hey, Ratch. Just checking in. You figure out how to hang that thing yet? Listen, the company's growing. Dad and I think you'd be a good fit, maybe in project management or," I cut him off, voice sharper than I meant. "Not interested, Matt. I have my own things to take care of." There was a pause, long enough to feel the tension. "Suit yourself," he said finally, before hanging up. I set the phone aside, more determined than ever. I began jotting the numbers in my notebook, mapping them as they appeared across the canvas. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of music in the order. My mind spun with possibilities. Were they dates? Coordinates? A code to something bigger? My heart pounded, and I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. It was close to 2 when my phone rang again, this time a softer tone, Margaret. Her concern was gentle but edged with worry. "You're not sleeping, are you, dear?" she asked. I tried to reassure her, but the words tangled in my throat. "It's just. I think there's more to the painting. Mom left me a puzzle, and I need to solve it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn always believed you would, Rachel. Just don't lose yourself in the search." I promised I'd rest, though we both knew it was a lie. Back at the painting, I squinted at the shifting shapes, trying to recall what Mom used to say when I grew frustrated with a tricky jigsaw. "Patience, Rachel. The pieces will come together if you trust yourself." I drew a deep breath, then traced my fingers over each number, feeling the roughness of the brushstrokes. As the city outside grew quieter, I let the tension in my body unwind. The numbers, now so clear, seemed to pulse in the lamplight. Were they a message, or merely a clever trick of art and shadow? I spoke aloud, voice barely more than a whisper. "Are these just numbers, or a message meant for me?" The question lingered, hovering between the humming of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a siren somewhere in the city. My hand lingered on the painting's surface, tracing each curve and corner. I realized then that this wasn't just about inheritance, or even about family pride. It was about discovering the truth my mother had hidden from me, trusting the instincts she'd spent her life nurturing in me. Outside, Boston slumbered on, but in my small apartment, something had awakened. I sat there, watching numbers bloom across a forest of dusk, certain, at last, that the search was only beginning. It's odd, the way true silence only seems to fall after midnight, when the city finally lets go and even the radiators seem to breathe easier. I was drifting in the living room, my wine glass untouched, the painting glowing in the lamplight, numbers swimming through the trees like quiet guardians. My notebook was open to a mess of sketches and strings of digits. I had just closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hush wrap around me, when the pounding began. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then the blows grew harder, rattling the door in its frame. I jerked upright, heart hammering. No one visits at this hour unless it's an emergency, or trouble. My apartment was suddenly small, every shadow magnified. Rachel. The voice was unmistakable, sharp, impatient, fraying at the edges. Matt. For a second, I didn't move. Then came the old memory, dredged up by fear, Matt, years ago, cornering me in the kitchen after Dad got angry. Family comes first, if you know what's good for you. That line had haunted me through childhood. Now, it sounded less like a warning and more like a threat. I stepped quietly toward the door, peering through the peephole. Matt stood in the hallway, his suit wrinkled, hair uncombed, something wild in his eyes. He pounded again, knuckles white. Open up, Rachel. We need to talk. Now. When I hesitated, he rattled the handle. I know you're awake. This isn't funny. For a moment, I considered not answering, but fear and curiosity danced in equal measure. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see his face under the harsh hallway light. What do you want, Matt? My voice was low, trying to hide the tremor. He glanced up and down the corridor, then shoved a manila envelope at me. I'll give you $5,000 for that painting right now. No questions asked. He sounded frantic, the edge in his voice replacing his usual arrogance. You don't understand, it's not just some sentimental thing. It's important to the company. To Dad. To me. His foot hovered dangerously near the threshold. I held the door firm. It's all I have left, Matt. Why do you even care? You made your feelings pretty clear at the reading. His jaw clenched. This isn't about that. There are things you don't know. I'm giving you a chance to make this easy, for both of us. When I shook my head, he tried to wedge himself in, pushing against the door. I slammed it shut, bolting the lock with trembling hands. My heart was racing, every nerve buzzing. I heard Matt's voice, muffled now, angry, then pleading. Rachel, open the door. Please. I need that painting. I'll double the offer. Name your price. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed the painting from its hook, clutching it like a shield, and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My breath came in shallow bursts. The whole apartment seemed to shrink around me, shadows stretching as Matt continued to shout outside, the words a desperate drumbeat. I pressed my forehead to the cool wall, fighting back tears. In that moment, I longed for my mother's steady voice, her hand on my back. You're stronger than you think, Rachel, she used to tell me when I was small and scared of the dark. I repeated it now, a mantra against the rising panic. I looked down at the painting in my hands. Its weight felt different tonight, more urgent, as if it had become a living thing. Turning it over, I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame, remembering Margaret's words about my mother's obsession with numbers and patterns. On a hunch, I pressed gently at a spot near the bottom right corner. To my astonishment, a sliver of the backing shifted, just enough to reveal a tiny gap. My heart skipped. Hands trembling, I coaxed out a folded envelope, the paper yellowed and soft at the creases. My mother's handwriting curled across the front, for Rachel. I sat down on the floor, knees drawn up, painting balanced beside me. The shouting from the other room faded as I carefully opened the letter, every breath sharp in my chest. Inside, her words spilled out, neat and hurried. She wrote of trust, of fear, of loving me beyond measure. She spoke of secrets hidden for safety, of being misunderstood by those closest to her. And she spoke directly to me. If you're reading this, Rachel, you've found what I always hoped you would. You have the patience to see beyond appearances, the courage to seek answers, even when it's hard. Tears pricked at my eyes. For the first time since the will was read, I let them fall, quiet and hot, smudging the edges of her words. I pressed the letter to my chest and rocked gently, memories rising and tumbling, Mom braiding my hair, tracing lines on the painting, her voice a balm in the night. This was no longer about inheritance, about what was fair or deserved. It was about connection, about the kind of love that lingers, long after the person is gone. Eventually, Matt's voice faded. I heard the slam of the front door, then silence. I stayed on the bedroom floor, the city's hush wrapping around me. Grief and relief mingled, strange but somehow settling. I felt the beginning of resolve forming deep inside, a promise to honor what my mother had entrusted to me. For a long while, I stared at the painting and the letter, their secrets laid bare under the pale light. Whatever came next, I was no longer searching for a reason to keep going. I had one, pressed between pages, whispered from the past. And as I finally closed my eyes, the last thing I heard was my mother's voice, soft but certain, guiding me forward, into whatever mysteries tomorrow would bring. The letter trembled in my hands, its edges worn soft by time, each word on the page so urgent I could almost feel my mother's voice at my shoulder. Her handwriting looped across the paper, familiar and yet, tonight, entirely new. I sat on the floor, knees pulled up, the painting and its hidden numbers beside me, the city outside lost to shadows. The world shrank to the space between me and my mother's final message. Rachel, she began, I hope you found this before your father and brother could. My breath caught. There are things your father and brother will never understand about me, or you. That's why I need you to trust what I'm about to tell you. You see patterns. You question what others accept. You always have. It felt as if she were speaking through the walls, right into my chest. The words that followed spilled out in a rush, as if she had only minutes to write them. She described how, years ago, she'd been the creative force behind Bennett Technologies, the patents, the breakthroughs, the designs that made the company a household name. But your father wanted the world to believe it was his alone, she wrote. Matt learned from him, not how to build, but how to take. There was bitterness in her script, but also pride. I hid my most important work, she confessed, and all the evidence you'll need to prove it. I used the only thing that could stay safe, art. The painting, Autumn Twilight, holds more than you know. The numbers, find their order, follow the sequence, and you'll have what you need to expose the truth. The letter included instructions, a riddle disguised as directions. The pattern is not random, she wrote. Overlay the shapes, use the sequence. When you find the final set, look beneath the painting's surface. It was a scavenger hunt across canvas and memory, and every line of her words rang with love and regret. Outside my bedroom door, Matt's footsteps thudded up and down the hallway, his voice carrying, angry, then pleading. Rachel. Open up. We need to talk. You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're getting into. The desperation in his tone chilled me. I pressed on, reading the letter again, piecing together the clues. She'd left me the map, now it was up to me to see it through. I set the letter gently on the bed and turned to the painting. Under the lamplight, the numbers I'd found glimmered faintly, almost vibrating against the dusk-colored woods. I followed my mother's instructions, tracing each shape in the order she described, clockwise from the largest triangle, then in reverse by color, counting only those with an even number of edges. The logic was pure Evelyn, the kind of puzzle she would whisper to me when I was little, both a challenge and a promise. My hand shook as I noted the full sequence: 5, 2, 7, 1, 4, 9, 3. I circled each number on a sheet of paper, feeling a new kind of resolve settle into my bones. This wasn't about proving my worth to Matt or my father anymore. It was about honoring my mother's trust, and maybe, finally, proving to myself that I could finish what she'd started. Matt's pounding grew more frantic, punctuated by angry shouts. I could hear him muttering on the phone, calling someone, maybe Dad, maybe a lawyer. Fear prickled up my skin. I realized how little separated us now, just a locked door and my own stubborn will. My mind flashed to something Mom once said as she tucked me in after a nightmare: bravery isn't about being fearless, Rachel. It's about standing your ground even when you're shaking. Determined, I picked up my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook only a little as I explained there was someone trying to force their way into my apartment. When the dispatcher promised to send officers, I finally called out, "Matt, I've called the police. You need to leave." There was a stunned silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of retreating footsteps. The tension in my shoulders eased as I listened to him curse and slam the front door on his way out. I sank back onto the bed, pressing my mother's letter to my heart. A slow sense of triumph mingled with sorrow. Outside, the city buzzed with distant life, horns, laughter, a siren somewhere blocks away. For the first time, I felt the invisible threads between my mother and me tighten rather than fray. My phone chimed, a message from Margaret, full of worry: "Rachel, they're taking everything from your mother's study. You have to hurry." I bolted upright. There was no time to waste. Working quickly, I photographed every inch of the painting, zooming in on the geometric shapes, the coded numbers, the sequence Mom had described. I snapped pictures of her letter, too, uploading them to the cloud for safekeeping. Every move felt like part of a relay, my mother handing off her truth to me running the final stretch. With the clues secured and my bag packed, I paused at the door. I glanced once more at the painting, its colors now alive with urgency. "I'm coming, Mom," I whispered into the hush. "I promise." There's a kind of strength you find only when you have nothing left to lose and everything to honor. As I left the apartment, her letter in my pocket, the painting wrapped tight beneath my arm, I carried more than grief or anger. I carried purpose. The night air outside bit at my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. Tomorrow, the real search would begin. And for the first time since she'd gone, I felt my mother walking with me, every step of the way. The city was only half awake as I loaded the painting and my mother's letter into the passenger seat, the sky behind the skyline blooming with the first pink streaks of dawn. I'd barely slept, but exhaustion was replaced by a taut, pulsing energy, a sense that something monumental was finally underway. As I pulled out into the quiet street, Evelyn's words played in my mind: "Nothing worthwhile comes easy." This journey, I knew, would be proof of that. Boston thinned behind me, the traffic melting into stretches of empty highway. The painting lay beside me, buckled in as if it were another living passenger, my mother's presence made tangible. The letter was tucked into my coat pocket. I kept reaching out to touch it, a talisman in a world that no longer felt entirely safe. With every passing mile, fog rolled low across the fields, wrapping the world in secrecy. I'd barely reached the outskirts when I caught a flash of headlights in the mirror. At first, nothing unusual. But they didn't fall away as I wound north. A black SUV hovered in the distance, never passing, never quite closing the gap. My pulse quickened. I took the next exit, cutting through a tangle of back roads, old barns, and red-leafed maples blurring past. I remembered childhood games, Mom and I making up stories about hidden spies, secret codes, treasures stashed in the woods. Only now, the chase was real. Every turn felt like a test of nerves. I pulled into a gas station, parked behind a delivery truck, and watched as the SUV cruised slowly past, its windows dark. My phone buzzed. Margaret's name popped up. "Are you all right, dear?" They'd been at the house all morning. "I think Matt is trying to find you. Please be careful." Her worry was a thread, drawing me home and warning me all at once. I promised I'd call when I could, trying to keep my voice steady. When the roads opened up again, I was alone. The world felt quieter, older. The directions in my mother's letter came back to me: take Route 17 north. Past the covered bridge, look for the stone gate with 2 birches. I turned onto the final lane, tires crunching over gravel, a farmhouse coming into view through the thinning fog. It looked abandoned, sagging porch, shutters askew, roof patched in places with rusted tin. But in the morning stillness, the place felt expectant, like it had been waiting. The farmhouse was locked, its windows shuttered. I circled the grounds, following the letter's clues. Where the garden wall breaks, count 5 paces east. The earth will sound hollow. I knelt, scraping away old leaves until I found a metal ring half buried in the soil. With a hard tug, a pair of cellar doors groaned open, cold air seeping up from below. Standing at the threshold, I hesitated. I thought of my mother, her hands busy with blueprints and wire, her quiet laughter echoing up the stairs as she worked long after I'd gone to bed. She'd been preparing me for this, I realized, not just with puzzles and bedtime riddles, but with the faith that I could solve them. "Nothing worthwhile comes easy," she used to say. I took a breath and descended, one step at a time. The air below was cool and sharp with the scent of machine oil and old paper. I switched on the flashlight app, the beam bouncing off shelves lined with blueprints and half-assembled inventions. My footsteps echoed in the stillness. At the far end of the cellar, a metal door barred the way. It had no handle, only a keypad, blinking patiently. I unwrapped the painting, hands trembling, and reviewed my notes. The code, my mother's sequence, still fresh in my mind. I pressed the numbers in: 5, 2, 7, 1, 4, 9, 3. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click, and the door swung inward, revealing a room that looked like the inside of a spaceship, workbenches cluttered with prototypes, cabinets full of files, a wall covered in patents, each bearing Evelyn Bennett's looping signature. My phone buzzed again, Margaret's text appearing on the screen: "Rachel, I think they're close. Be careful." I glanced up at the single, grimy window above ground level, catching the movement of a shadow crossing the yard. My heart thudded. Matt, or someone working for him, had followed after all. But there was no time for fear. I snapped pictures of the lab, every blueprint and invention, and sent them to a secure email, just in case. I moved quickly, scanning files, looking for anything that confirmed my mother's story, and my own role in it. I knew I might only have minutes before company arrived. Then, with a flick of a switch, I flooded the room with light. Rows of inventions blinked awake, tiny robots whirring in glass cases, a solar cell array gleaming in the corner, an old record player spinning silently. The sight was overwhelming, a lifetime of creativity kept hidden, all for this moment. A creak sounded behind me, and I turned. In the doorway, a shadow moved, tall and familiar. The cliffhanger I'd feared became real: someone was in the lab with me. But I stood my ground, the weight of my mother's faith settling over my shoulders. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was here to protect her legacy, to bring the truth out of the shadows and into the light. The first thing I noticed as I stepped into the lab was the hush, a silence so deep it seemed to vibrate with memory. I held my breath, half expecting the world to shift, or my mother's laughter to echo from some shadowed corner. For a long moment, I just stood there, taking it in, shelves crowded with tiny machines, walls lined with blueprints and curling folders, the soft hum of a ventilation system fighting off the chill. Even as a little girl, I'd felt it. My mother was always half in another world, one foot in ours, the other somewhere brighter and more mysterious. She'd let me watch her sometimes, tools spread out, her brow furrowed as she pieced together circuit boards or sketched impossible shapes. "You see more than you realize, Rachel," she used to say, winking over the rim of her glasses. I used to think it was just a compliment. Now, in this space she'd kept hidden from everyone else, I understood what she meant. The light flickered on overhead, and my own reflection swam up in the steel of a cabinet door. I felt small, frightened and in awe, but also a little proud. My mother's world was real, and for the first time, it belonged to me. I moved slowly along the workbench, my fingertips trailing over a cluster of prototypes, a solar-powered radio, a medical sensor the size of a dime, a circuit board with my mother's initials etched into one corner. Folders stuffed with legal pads and diagrams were stacked in neat rows. I opened one, heart thudding. Inside were blueprints, some marked confidential, others with patent numbers, all in her hand. There were even letters to attorneys, none sent, explaining her inventions and the battles she'd fought to keep them her own. Beside a battered office chair, I found a thick journal. Its leather was cracked, the spine faded. I opened it, pages full of notes, ideas scribbled in the margins, half-finished sketches, even a poem or two. There was a kind of wildness here I'd never seen in her public face. My throat tightened. I realized I was crying, quietly, for all the years she'd kept this brilliant secret from the world, and from me. My phone buzzed, the shrill sound jarring in the stillness. Alexandra Chin's name flashed on the screen. I answered, voice barely steady. "I found it," I whispered. "I found everything." Alexandra's words were urgent but kind. "Rachel, you need to be careful. There are people looking for you. Make copies of everything. Don't trust anyone, not even family." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and hung up. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the metal stairs behind me. I froze, listening as they drew closer, heavy and determined. My heart pounded so loudly I worried whoever it was might hear it through the walls. The door banged open and there, framed in the harsh light, stood my father. John Bennett was older than I remembered, his hair more silver than gray, but his eyes were sharp and hard as flint. For a heartbeat, I thought I was seeing a ghost. "Dad?" I managed, my voice cracking. He stepped inside, lips twisted in a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Surprised, Rachel? You should be. You're not the only one who knows how to keep secrets." Before I could answer, Matt slipped in behind him, looking rumpled and desperate. His gaze darted around the lab, greed and panic wrestling in his expression. "We've been looking for this place for months," Matt snapped. "You had to make it difficult, didn't you?" Dad cut him off with a raised hand. "Let's not waste time. You have something that belongs to us." He gestured to the painting, to the files. "This is all Bennett Technologies property. You're going to hand it over, and we'll forget this ever happened." I took a step back, feeling the old, icy dread claw at my chest. "You faked your death," I said, the truth unraveling in my mind. Why? His face hardened. It was necessary. Your mother changed all the security before she died. We needed you to lead us here. Consider it a test. And now, you've passed. Matt inched closer, eyes wild. Just give us the files, Rachel. You don't understand, Dad and I are finished if this gets out. Tension knotted the air. My mother's voice returned, as clear as if she stood behind me. If you ever feel trapped, Rachel, remember where I kept my secrets. I looked around the workstation, fingers searching beneath the desktop until I found the notch she'd carved into the wood years ago. My thumb brushed a small, raised bump, a button. The panic button. Don't do anything stupid, Dad said, sensing my movement. He blocked the exit, Matt at his side. You're not leaving here until we get what we want. With a click, he locked the door behind them. My breath quickened. I pressed my hand to the panic button, remembering Evelyn's warnings about what the lab could do. I met my father's gaze, steady now. You've always underestimated us, I said softly. But Mom and we planned for this. The whir of machines seemed to grow louder, as if the lab itself was waking up. A rush of fear, and then a calm, stubborn strength. I wasn't just my mother's daughter, I was her heir, her ally. I wouldn't let them erase what she'd built. My fingers hovered, ready. Whatever came next, I wouldn't let them win. And as the light flickered once more, I realized, the real battle for the truth had only just begun. There's a particular kind of fear that's quieter than panic, cold, calculating, the kind that sharpens your senses and forces you to see the world as it truly is. That was the fear that settled in my bones as the door clanged shut, sealing me in the lab with my father and brother, surrounded by the tangible weight of my mother's genius, and the Bennett family's darkest secrets. The silence inside was deep, broken only by the faint hum of machinery and the muted sound of my own breath. I could feel Dad watching me, measuring, as if he were sizing up a problem that needed solving. Matt paced in tight circles, his agitation growing with every minute. In this cocoon of secrets, all the years of denial, ambition, and betrayal felt close enough to touch. Evelyn's words echoed in my memory, sometimes, you have to risk everything for the truth. I glanced at the computer terminal, the screensaver a swirl of blue and gold, the same colors as dusk and the autumn twilight painting. My hand hovered near the keyboard, but I kept my face neutral, waiting. Dad broke the silence first. Rachel, think about what you're doing. No one will believe you, even if you do get out. These documents won't stand up in court. You're gambling your future, your safety, for what? Sentimentality? His voice was smooth, practiced, he'd spent a lifetime making the unreasonable sound logical. Matt stopped pacing, turning on me with a bitter sneer. You know what? This is just like Mom, always making it about herself, always wanting to be the victim. You're ruining everything she built. His voice cracked, desperate. I saw the flicker of the scared boy he used to be, but it was buried under years of resentment. I drew myself up, feeling my mother's strength bracing my back. I'm not ruining anything, I said quietly. I'm trying to set it right. My hands moved with purpose, keying in a string of numbers Mom had hidden in the letter, the clarity protocol. I'd memorized every step, every instruction. She'd planned for this moment as if she knew exactly how it would unfold. Dad stepped closer, his voice low. Rachel, don't. You have no idea what you're unleashing. You think the world cares about your mother's inventions? They'll tear you apart. There was a flash of real fear in his eyes, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. Let's talk about this. We can work something out, family, remember? Matt shifted gears, dropping the bravado. Come on, Rachel. Please. We can fix this. Give us the files and we'll protect you. Dad's right. You're not thinking straight. The pleading in his voice almost undid me, but then I remembered Evelyn's tired eyes in her final days, the loneliness she'd worn like a shroud. I looked from one to the other, then back at the computer. My fingers danced across the keys. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in harsh red. A voice, calm, mechanical, rang out from hidden speakers. Clarity protocol initiated. Evidence upload in progress. The panic that swept across Dad's face was instantaneous. He lunged forward, but I moved back, placing the workstation between us. It's too late, I said, voice trembling only slightly. Everything's being sent to the SEC, the police, the press. There's nothing you can do now. Matt's face crumpled. He sank to his knees, head in his hands, whispering curses. Dad, John Bennett, the man who had always seemed invincible, looked suddenly old, all the swagger drained away. He slammed his fist against the steel door. You have no idea what you've done. This is the end of everything. I met his gaze, holding it. You taught me how to fight, Dad. You just never thought I'd fight you. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder, echoing through the underground halls. The security alarms blared, strobing red and blue, the only exit sealed tight. Outside, I could hear muffled voices, the stamp of boots, law enforcement, come to collect the pieces of the Bennett legacy. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for them both, almost. But as I watched my father search frantically for a way out, and my brother curl up in defeat, I realized this wasn't just a reckoning for them, but for me as well. I was the one who had to live with the truth, to rebuild from the ashes of the family I'd once hoped to belong to. And as the alarms shrieked and the first glimmers of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, I felt, if not relief, then the weight of decision. My mother's voice was with me still, steadier now, guiding me through the darkness. This was the cost of honesty, of love, of legacy. The world outside the lab was nothing like the silence I'd left behind. Sirens split the air, police radios crackled, and the flash of news cameras turned the early morning haze into a strange, pulsing day. I stumbled into the sunlight, blinking, clutching the painting and a folder of copied files, the cold Vermont air biting at my cheeks. Somewhere behind me, my father and brother were being led away in handcuffs, two men who had once seemed unassailable, now small and cornered. The days that followed blurred together, a parade of interviews, questions, signatures, explanations. In a sterile room at the police station, I sat across from Alexandra Chin, her sharp suit wrinkled from lack of sleep but her eyes clear and steady. She walked me through what would happen next, voice calm as she listed the agencies involved, the legal steps, the likely media storm. I nodded, mostly numb, answering each question as best I could. The truth was, I still hadn't processed what I'd done. Reporters gathered on the courthouse steps, microphones bristling, their questions bouncing off the stone walls. Ms. Bennett, is it true you exposed your own family? What will happen to Bennett Technologies? I kept my head down, letting Alexandra handle them. She was both shield and guide, leading me through hallways and forms, always with a quiet word of reassurance. At the hospital waiting room, where I'd been sent for a standard checkup after the ordeal, I found Margaret waiting for me, a paper bag of scones and her kind, familiar smile. She pulled me into a hug, and I let myself sag against her warmth. Your mother always said the truth would find a way, she whispered, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. She knew you'd do the right thing, even when it cost you. We sat by the window, sipping tea from styrofoam cups. Margaret told me stories I'd never heard, about Evelyn's plans, her secret work, the long nights spent cataloging inventions and recording her thoughts. She wanted you to have a life beyond the company, but she also wanted you to know where you came from, Margaret said softly. She believed in justice, Rachel. And she believed in you. Later that afternoon, I found myself in a borrowed blazer, sitting in a conference room with Alexandra and a half-dozen lawyers. On the TV in the corner, the news played on a loop, Bennett Technologies stock tumbling, headlines screaming about stolen patents, corporate betrayal, a hidden woman's genius finally coming to light. Matt and John were being held pending investigation, the board had resigned in disgrace. It all felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's story unfold. When the legal teams finished their questions, Alexandra placed a thick envelope in front of me. This is from the patent office, she said, her smile gentle. Your mother protected everything. The patents, the intellectual property, the assets, they're all legally yours now. She made sure you'd be taken care of, even if the rest of the world turned against you. I traced my name on the official letter, the weight of it both daunting and comforting. As the sun set over the city skyline, painting the glass towers in golden rose, I walked with Margaret up Beacon Hill. The streets felt unfamiliar, changed by scandal, and yet, in some way, cleansed. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was Evelyn's heir, the keeper of her dreams, and the only one who could decide what happened next. When we reached my apartment, a courier was waiting, a small, battered envelope in his hand. I recognized my mother's handwriting at once, for after the storm. My heart stuttered. Margaret touched my arm. Go on, dear. She knew you'd make it here. I nodded, turning the envelope over in my hands, afraid to open it but more afraid not to. Night fell, city lights flickering on one by one. I stood at the window, staring out at Boston, the weight of the envelope in my palm. Everything I'd known had changed, my family, the company, the story I'd told myself for years. I wondered if I was ready for whatever came next, if I had the strength to step out from the shadows and into the life my mother had hoped I would claim. Justice, I realized, is not a finish line. It's a beginning, a chance to shape something better out of what was broken. I pressed the envelope to my heart and let the city's heartbeat blend with my own, steady and sure. Tomorrow, I would open it. Tonight, for the first time, I allowed myself to rest. I never imagined myself walking into my father's old office as the new owner of Bennett Technologies. Yet there I was, shoulders tense, hands clammy, a sheaf of legal documents in my bag and Evelyn's words echoing in my heart. One day, you'll be stronger than you think. The air smelled the same, leather, polished wood, a faint trace of the cologne my father favored. Only now, the hush in the executive suite felt different. The power that once excluded me now waited for my direction. Alexandra Chin met me by the elevator, all brisk confidence and steady presence. You're ready, she said, and I believed her, if only for a moment. We made our way to the boardroom, where the directors, some red-eyed from sleepless nights, others bristling with quiet resentment, sat waiting. The mood was brittle, a nervous tension hanging over the glossy table. As I entered, a few looked up, uncertain whether to nod or scowl. The board chair, Mr. Hughes, cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, he began, careful with the title, we're still absorbing recent events. There are processes. Protocols. Perhaps it would be best if you... Alexander cut him off, sliding a thick folder across the table. These are the transfer documents, powers of attorney, and a court order. Rachel Bennett is now the legal CEO, sole shareholder, and beneficiary of all company intellectual property. It's settled. Her tone brokered no argument. I took a breath, smoothing my hands over the edge of the table, remembering Evelyn's steady gaze when she once told me, integrity isn't about being perfect, Rachel. It's about doing what's right, even when it scares you. My voice was quiet but clear. I know this transition is difficult. I'm not here to erase the past, I'm here to change the future. A murmur rippled through the room. Some faces closed off, a few younger employees glanced at each other, wide-eyed and hopeful. From today, Bennett Technologies will compensate every inventor whose work was used without acknowledgement or payment. We're creating a foundation, named after Evelyn Bennett, to restore what was stolen and invest in new talent. We'll audit every patent, every partnership. If we're going to survive, it'll be as a company that stands for something better. One of the directors, an older woman with silver hair, spoke up. And what of the stockholders? The lawsuits? I met her gaze. We'll take our share of the blame. But we'll do it transparently. That's the only way forward. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the tension loosened just a little. After the meeting, Alexandra squeezed my shoulder. You did it. I tried to smile, the weight of responsibility settling heavier than I'd expected. It's only the beginning, I said, and she nodded. As the boardroom emptied, I wandered the halls, passing familiar faces, engineers, receptionists, janitors, some looking wary, others offering shy nods of encouragement. I paused by the break room, where Margaret waited, a thermos of tea in hand. Your mother would be proud, she whispered, slipping a paper napkin into my palm. On it was written, in Evelyn's script, be kind. That's the only legacy that lasts. When I reached my father's office, the space felt both haunted and strangely hollow. I stood for a long time before the dark paneled wall where his portrait once hung, then reached for the painting, Autumn Twilight. I hung it in the empty space, its dusk-lit woods casting a gentler shadow over the room. Somehow, it felt right, a symbol of secrets brought to light, of a legacy remade. I walked the perimeter of the office, feeling along the bookshelves. One panel shifted under my hand, revealing a hidden safe. The code, my mother's sequence, opened it with a soft click. Inside was a diary, the pages dense with my father's neat, controlled handwriting, lists of inventions, dates, names, some I recognized, others not. There was a list, too, of inventors my father had wronged, each one annotated with brief notes and numbers. I ran my fingers over the entries, a map of wrongs waiting to be righted. With the sun dipping low, I returned to my desk and drafted a letter to every person on that list. You deserved better, I wrote, and I want to make it right. Each word felt like an act of contrition, a promise to do what my parents, both of them, in their own ways, never could. As I packed up for the day, my phone buzzed. A message from the jail, Matt wanted to see me. My heart squeezed, caught between dread and an old longing for reconciliation. I slipped the painting's frame, now warm in the fading light, under my arm. Before I left, I took a final look around. The office felt transformed, a place not just of memory, but of possibility. And as I walked into the evening, I carried with me the knowledge that sometimes, healing begins in the most unlikely of places. The first board meeting as CEO was nothing like I expected, it was a battle and a promise, all in one. I arrived early, the Aurora Foundation documents clutched in my hands, Margaret's encouragement still echoing in my ears. Alexandra stood at my side, unwavering as always, and I watched the directors file in, some wary, others still shell-shocked from the chaos of the past weeks. Evelyn's final envelope, opened late the night before, had been brief, the real work begins now. She was right. Cleaning up after a storm is hard. Building something new in its place is harder. I stood at the head of the table, sunlight catching on the ring I still wore, my mother's, now mine. Good morning, I began, voice steadier than I felt. Today, we launch the Aurora Foundation. Its mission is simple: restitution for those we wronged, investment in the future, and a new culture of honesty and kindness. We can't rewrite our history, but we can atone for it, and we can lead from the front. A ripple of skepticism ran through the room. One board member leaned in, voice edged with doubt. And what about profits, Rachel? Our shareholders, I met his gaze. If we invest in people, profits will follow. If we ignore the past, we'll lose everything. I won't lead by fear or silence. I saw surprise flicker in a few faces, a slow thaw. Alexandra handed out packets, plans, legal agreements, even a few thank you letters from inventors who'd already received restitution. It was real, and we weren't hiding it. The launch event later that week was modest, a gathering in the main lobby, a few local reporters, employees milling uncertainly. Margaret stood near the refreshments, eyes shining. Your mother would have worn her best hat for this, she said, squeezing my hand. I made my speech as simple as possible. We are more than our history. This foundation is our first step forward, but not our last. As the applause swelled, real and tentative, I realized I wasn't alone in wanting a new beginning. That afternoon, Margaret invited me to her apartment. It smelled of lemon polish and old books, just as I remembered from childhood visits. Over tea, she shared stories Evelyn never told, about her first invention, a radio made from a coffee tin, about her courage the night she decided to hide her greatest work, about the doubts she sometimes confessed to Margaret alone. She worried you'd think she was weak for staying, Margaret said softly, her hand over mine. But she stayed for you. She wanted to give you choices she never had. I left with a lighter heart, grateful for the secrets that finally felt like blessings, not burdens. That evening, I made my way to the county jail to see Matt. The guard led me through a maze of halls, keys jangling. Matt looked thinner, hair grown out, eyes restless. He met me with a kind of fragile bravado, shifting between apology and accusation. You won, Rachel. Was it worth it? Did she ever really love either of us, or just her inventions? The bitterness in his voice was old, worn, more tired than angry. I sat with him, letting him talk, and when he ran out of blame, I offered the only truth I knew. We all lost something. But I'm choosing to build, not to destroy. He nodded, once, and looked away. As I left, I wished him peace. For the first time, I truly meant it. The weeks passed in a blur, meetings, signatures, visits from former inventors. Some were grateful, some skeptical, but with each check written, each apology offered, the company's pulse shifted, little by little. One quiet Sunday, I sat at my kitchen table with pen and paper, the painting autumn twilight catching the morning light from the next room. I wrote a letter to my mother, words I'd carried in my heart for years, finally put to page. Thank you for trusting me, for believing in more than legacy or reputation. I see now how much you sacrificed so I could choose my own path. I hope you're proud. The act of writing was an ending, and a beginning. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a cup of chamomile tea and studied the painting, the dusk color still shifting across the canvas. I blinked, surprised, a new detail had appeared, a faint constellation of dots in the shadows, like a blessing hidden in plain sight. It made me smile, a secret just for me. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a peace I'd never known before. I knew I couldn't heal every wound or right every wrong. But I could build something honest, with kindness as its cornerstone. And I could finally let my mother's story, and my own, find their place in the light. 2 years can pass in a blink or a lifetime, depending on where you stand. For me, those years were a transformation, slow, sometimes painful, always surprising. There were mornings I woke up forgetting the taste of fear, and nights when the hum of the city outside was a comfort rather than a threat. Aurora Innovations, my mother's dream, and now mine, had become a beacon for something I once thought impossible: hope. It was the day of our annual innovation fair, and the halls of our new headquarters pulsed with an energy that felt both familiar and brand new. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off prototype drones, solar chargers, and robotic arms. Young inventors, some wide-eyed, others brimming with bravado, hurried between display tables, pausing to explain, to argue, to dream. The building, which once echoed with secrets and suspicion, now buzzed with the sounds of possibility. Margaret arrived just after lunch, carrying homemade cookies and her signature thermos of sweet tea. She wore her favorite green scarf, Evelyn's, handed down on a rainy day last fall. "You've made a home out of this place," she whispered as she hugged me, and I realized it was true. The old ache, the longing for approval, the fear of not being enough, had faded to something softer, almost fond. Alexandra Chin joined me on stage as we prepared for the keynote. She nodded toward the crowd, young women in lab coats, students with nervous hands, engineers, and artists shoulder to shoulder. "You know," she said, "this is the legacy you built." I shook my head, smiling. "We built. And Mom. And everyone who believed in something better." She squeezed my hand, just once, before stepping aside so I could speak. Standing at the podium, I saw not just faces but stories, each one a reminder of how much can change when truth is given room to grow. "We're here because someone, somewhere, believed in a new way of doing things," I told them. At Aurora Innovations, we invest in ideas, but more than that, we invest in people. No one's work will ever be stolen or silenced again, not while I have a say. There was a ripple of applause, real and unforced, and it carried me through the rest of my remarks. Afterward, I wandered the exhibit floor, letting students pull me aside to show off circuit boards and code. One young woman, fierce and shy at once, handed me a project file. "My mom was an inventor," she said. "She never got the credit she deserved. This is for her." I found myself blinking away tears as I handed her the Aurora Award, our highest honor, knowing her story was the beginning of someone else's healing. Later, back in my office, I let the hush settle around me. The autumn twilight painting hung behind my desk, its dusk color softened by years of sunlight. I found myself studying the familiar geometric shapes, tracing them in the late glow. For the first time, I noticed a tiny shift, a new glimmer in the corner, a line I could have sworn wasn't there before. I smiled, thinking of Evelyn and her penchant for secrets. "The most valuable things are hidden in plain sight," she once told me. How right she'd been. Margaret dropped by with a cup of tea and a new story from the old days, and we sat for a while, letting the laughter fill the room. "She'd be proud, you know," Margaret said quietly, "not just of what you've built, but of the woman you've become." I squeezed her hand, grateful. As evening fell, the fair wound down, and I walked the quiet halls one last time. The building, alive with stories and new beginnings, felt at peace. Before I left, I closed my office door and lingered in front of the painting. The geometric shape seemed to shimmer in the low light, just for a second, as if Evelyn herself was sending a wink through time. I leaned in and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. For everything." On my way home, I drove past the old farmhouse in Vermont, now cared for and quiet, wildflowers blooming where weeds once grew. I paused to watch the fireflies dance, another pattern, another gift. Life, I realized, was not about tying up every loose end, but about learning to see the beauty in what's left unfinished. Back at home, as the city lights blinked on one by one, I poured a final cup of tea and sat with my memories. The painting, the fair, the faces of young inventors, the shape of my mother's handwriting, all of it was mine to keep, to honor, to pass along. And as I drifted to sleep, I swore I saw the shapes in the painting shift once more, hinting at mysteries yet to come. But I felt no fear, only gratitude, and a sense that, at last, I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I sit in my office, the gentle glow of dusk settling over the city and the old painting still watching over me, I realize how much love and courage can change the course of a life. What started as a simple inheritance turned out to be a lesson in forgiveness, honesty, and the quiet strength of family. Sometimes, the things we think are small or even burdensome hold the keys to healing, if only we take the time to look closer and listen with an open heart. In a world that's always rushing forward, there's something powerful in remembering where we come from and who believed in us along the way. If this story has touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or memories of family and resilience. Sharing our journeys may help someone else find hope or a hidden blessing in their own lives.